National Research Council in their report highlighted is there's plenty of, not plenty, there's gaps in the data, but there's a lot of information out there. So it would be encouraging, I think, the synthesis type activities that pull together information from disparate sources in order to analyze things in a different way and develop deeper understanding. So the science plan is perhaps more of a roadmap for the issues. It will point out what we know right now, where the various sources of information go. You should be able to look, I imagine, at the various references so you can find out who are the experts, who's working on that field. And I think if we're successful with this, the idea would be that the system is so big that you can't have meetings with all the scientists every time the question comes up. But how do you build a mechanism so you can have clusters of scientists who are interested in a certain issue interacting and working with each other, even if they're coming from different perspectives? Because I think that type of interaction will move things forward much faster than the sort of entrenched approach which is evident in some places now, not everywhere, but in one or two places.
Thank you very much. And I would also, this would be a question that I would put to the Water Quality Monitoring Council, and I don't think John's in the room, but I know where he lives. So I will ask it of him. I think the estuarine committee, the estuarine group, needs to lay out kind of what the vision of the estuary, you know, what recommendations are they making for the estuary, and what does that look like? Or maybe there are like 4 different choices that we have to manage the estuary in the future. I don't know, but it sounds to me that since that group exists and they're functioning, it'd be good to check in with them. So Karen, there you are. Okay, let's see what they have to say. Thank you.
Yeah, and building on that, just indicators. You know, when you're doing monitoring and doing estuary data collection, what indicators are meaningful in terms of outcome targets?
We have 4. Miraculously, we went from 4 to 4 blue cards, and I'll just read off. John Herrick gets to start us off. Michael Jackson, Brett Baker, and Tim O'Laughlin. You have 3 to 5 minutes. Introduce yourself.
And Tim does
thank you,
not
Madam
have
Chair.
to say who his favorite seatmate was over the past 2 days. Sorry for interrupting.
Thank you. I'm John Herrick, South Delta Water Agency. There are a lot of things that can be said. Let me just start with a few. What has to be done through this process, I believe, is a public trust balancing. It seems that the discussions so far assume, I think wrongfully, that a public trust balance is somebody suggests we need more water for fish or some other action, and then somebody says, well, that's going to have an adverse impact on supplies, and so you move those two together somewhere eventually. That's not a public trust balance. The public trust balance is to quantify, put the cost or the value on the destruction of the estuary or the loss of the fishery or whatever it is. You put a number on that, and you compare that to the impact on any water user that might lose water or something else. That's absent, I think, from the discussion so far, and that's an integral part of what we have to do. Now, secondly, I think, and I say this jokingly, I don't want to go back to the old John Herrick and disappoint member Dodock, but you know, it's painfully clear, I think, that we need to get biologists from the fishery agencies to sit down and take an oath and then ask them questions. Because we saw that nobody wants to tell you what to do. They all want to tell you, you know, there's a whole lot of bad things that happen if you do something. Well, just imagine us sitting here with the biologists and saying, do you think the water quality standards in the 1995 plan are protecting the beneficial use of fish and wildlife? And then they'll all say no. And then you can go through each one and say, well, do you think we need more inflow at this point? When? Yes, no, maybe. Do you think you need additional criteria? You could ask each one of them, do you think you need a fall X2? How much? How long? And then you'll get answers. Because when you just have us disparate interests come up to you, you will get none of us to say, I think you should take more water from me, right? And so I don't want to crush Board Member Dodok's glimmer of hope, but I don't believe there is a glimmer of hope. You have to force people to take positions. Some of them won't, and that'll tell you something too. But that's what has to be done.
Actually, John, I was expecting suggestions of take water from him or her rather than the me part.
I can do that. I can do that easily. But anyway, that kind of leads to the next part, which is we can see that, well, DWR and the Bureau, the Bureau wasn't here, sorry. The resource agencies have conflicts within themselves. Let's put it nicely. Or the management agencies, we don't know what they're going to do. But we need to get them to say, do you think the standards, the obligations under which you operate are sufficient? And if they say yes, then we know where we stand because the estuary is in decline. Once you get answers, then you can do an analysis, weigh, and see if there is evidence to support it so you can adopt it or not. That's up to you. The issue of other stressors is a little different in that if somebody says, well, you shouldn't put more water down the river because someone else is polluting, that doesn't solve your issue of how much water is needed to protect the beneficial use. And so I jokingly say, because I'm on good terms with most of the presenters, today we learned some stuff that I think is questionable. And if people were under oath, we could test that. We saw beautiful animation that showed under 2,000 CFS delta outflow, there was no tidal action in the South Delta. And we had net flows downstream in the South Delta. Well, if that's the case, then I can throw away 2 storage lockers of South Delta information for the past 40 years. We also saw that because we had a decade of low hydrology, that increased exports had no effect on outflow. Well, those are all assertions that people may believe, and maybe they're true. But you're not going to know what's chaff and what's can be relied upon until people are under oath. Now, we've had this discussion before for 2006. Nobody's going to do it, but the best way to find answers is to put biologists under oath and see what they think is and is not needed. Anyway, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Since John did mostly what I'm going to do, I'm Michael Jackson. I'm here for the California Water Impact Network and also for the California Sports Fishing Protection Alliance, since Mr. Jennings is under the weather and watching you all on TV. I've decided to throw away what I was going to do and try to answer what I think are your questions. What would I do if I were where you are? The first thing I would do is to take a look at Jonathan Rosenfield's testimony about the limits of estuaries around the world on the amount of water that can be taken out of them. I don't remember his exact numbers, but they were less than 20%. First, do all of your scientists believe that to be true? Because this is more about how much water can come out of the estuary than it is about how it comes out, how that gets replaced in society's needs, how it gets balanced, or whether or not I've got to relearn how to buy detergent so that I can put more phosphorus in my nitrogen. And that was terribly interesting, but that's not our problem. Our problem probably is that we have promised way too much water to way too many people. The second thing I would do, if that is the conclusion, is to set a time period by which I got to whatever that number, the maximum number to try in terms of water out of the estuary. And it'd probably be 10 to 15 years. because that gives everybody time to show you how they would meet such a number. And to me, it's the only way to ensure your dual goals of preserving the estuary and making the water rights, the water reliable. The third thing I would do is try to determine whether or not certain uses were more important than other uses. And I know that's tough, and I know it's also intricate. So I would probably spend a year or so trying to determine whether that's true. The agriculturalists have the benefit of providing Pacific Flyway water in the rice industry, which has got to be calculated in. The urban water is more into the storm drains or into Hyperion and into the sea. But I do believe that the economy of California is part of that balance. And that economy is mostly in the urban areas. So I've always been a fan of the original State Water Project decision in the contracts, in droughts, to provide an urban preference. And I believe it was a terrible mistake in the Monterey Agreement to get rid of that. I believe it was also a terrible mistake in the Monterey Agreement to get rid of Article 18B, which says we know we didn't capture Ronald Reagan's wild and scenic rivers on the coast. We know we didn't build the storage we thought we were going to build. And therefore, at some point in the future, what we've promised in the State Water Project system should be reduced to meet the actual water available. I also know, as you do, that your last estimate of how much water rights there were is that, not counting the hydroelectric water, you've promised about 4 times the amount of rights that there is in the typical rainfall year. And I think you are going to be addressing that in the third phase, the water rights phase, of whatever you decide to do here. I think that what's going to happen is you're going to have to ask these questions first of the scientists. You know, how much water can you take out of a watershed like this before it collapses? They can look all over the world. If they can find a watershed that has 50% of the water taken out of it, or 60, that's still surviving and thriving, great, then we're doing fine. And our fish just seem to be dying for no apparent reason. The fourth thing is that I would do is I would understand that we're talking about throwing around a lot of money. BDCP is going to roll in here, and you know, before interest, it's now 23 billion. I'm sorry, I'm not used to billion. With interest, it's in the 50 billion area. We're dependent upon magic screens that have never been built anywhere. We're going to try them. Well, how about if as an interim, we screen the diversion we have? We're talking about dual use. So I would take a good hard look, have a different panel of scientists, take a good hard look at whether these screens are really real things. Our expert who worked on screens for nymphs and for Fish and Game for years and was a fan of the original peripheral canal no longer believes that's possible because of the state of the science on screens. But what you can do is you can divert some of this money to saving the salmon. You're not going to save the salmon by taking all of the Sacramento Valley folks' water. I mean, it's too hot, it's too flat, there's no habitat. You're going to have to direct people to find out how to get these fish, even if it's only in trucks, around these dams soon, or they're going to cook. It's a lot cheaper than to use up all of your water on the fish problem. And so I would establish a bypass committee until you find out that that won't work. The next thing I would do is you're going to have to be efficient with money. You've got to pay all the scientists. You've got to pay all the staff you're going to need. You've got to pay basically for the decisions that you make in terms of monitoring. You're going to have to set up monitoring systems. And so it seems to me that what you really need is to do what they did at Mono Lake, which is the board hired independent economists to take a look first about what is the value of Mono Lake. Why don't we just let it go? And they came to the conclusion that it was a much greater value than the alternative water supplies for the Department of Water and Power. We've never done that for the Delta. You know, you get, it's going to hurt me and my interest X amount of dollars. You get all kinds of radical numbers from people like me about what we think an estuary that functions is worth. But until you know, you can't balance. We got here in the, from 1630, I go a little farther back, 1988, 1982. We got here because we never took a look at the externalized costs of everything we did. And so it seems to me that the board needs to take control of this process. We asked the DSC to do it. They didn't. We asked Cal Fed to do it, and they didn't and failed. And the Delta Stewardship Council says they won't balance, they won't do economics, they won't do a water availability analysis. And so those are the three things that I would do if I sat where you are today. Thank you.
Thank you, except it's 5. Thank you. It's 5 things.
5 things.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Brett.
Hello, my name is Brett Baker, and my middle name is George, and I'm sorry to disappoint, but that's all I'm going to come up here to tell you that you didn't already know. But I'm going to try and be brief. I only have 3 or 4, maybe 5 comments and 1 question. I spent all day yesterday and last night thinking about what's the 1 question I think that I could ask would be most effective. So I want to first off thank you all for doing the job that you're doing. You've been engaged here for the last 2 days, and you've been asking a lot of good questions. And I want to just tell you that I understand you're a quasi-judicial body, and I'm going to do my best to be quasi-respectful of everyone in the room here today. But first off, I wanted to start out by telling you why my opinion is the most important. And that is because I've got 100% life experience in the Delta. No, I'm being serious. I've lived there all my life on Sutter Island. My family's been farming that dirt since the 1850s. And I went to school at Davis, studied fish biology with Peter Moyle, and listened to Bill Bennett at American Fisheries Society's meetings. I went to work for the Department of Fish and Game as a biologist, so I feel like I've got something relevant to say, or think so anyhow. But I just wanted you to reiterate some thoughts and ideas that were running through my mind in the last couple of days. You saw some really magical math here in the last couple of days. I think some of these folks in the room could be card-carrying members of the Flat Earth Society. I mean, they make some very compelling arguments. But I think most of what you need to look at when you look at those numbers has to do with respect to the time frames. You know, surely tidal influence, the moon affects that, times of year that these flows are required. I don't think that there's one single number you're going to talk about that's going to give you some magical silver bullet to repair or protect the public trust in the Delta. I think that a lot of it has to do with time, and on a short period and on a long period. And so that brings me to my second comment, which is just a little bit about what I feel is relevant history in the Delta with respect to time frame. By the 1920s, most of the Delta was reclaimed, and pelagic organism decline, as we all know, hasn't really been identified until the last decade. So I think that when you talk about things like habitat and habitat in the Delta specifically, you have to be careful what types of habitat you create, and the effects water flows have on inviting invasive species into the estuary. And with respect to some other history, I think that it's important, in addition to all of what was shown, I think it's important, some of my favorite historical reads are Cadillac Desert. I like King of California. It's not a bad read either. Chinatown's a good one if you're into brevity. And then I think everybody should take a trip down 395 and look at the Owens Valley today and see what we have there. And some folks, when they drive home, could do that. You know, and if you're going to establish a range, and all that being said, to just say that if you're going to establish a range, we know what end of the range is going to be met. And I think that some of those slides showed a fairly good ability to meet requirements very closely, but only so closely. And with respect to, my last point being with respect to habitat is, I think you guys need to ask yourself, what knobs do you really have to turn? And with respect to creating habitat, I don't know what your authority is or what your recommendations would be. And I don't know if I believe that's up to some other boards. Or bodies, and I'm not saying it's not possible, but I think it's most important about when and where and how. That's when you guys can affect what habitat is activated, I guess. Or, I mean, basically, I spent 5 years at Davis studying fish biology and learned that fish live in water, and so depending upon the temperature and where that water is, sure, yeah, it's going to create different habitats or niche space. So I think that you know, you talk about upstream floodplain activation and waterside levee improvements in the Delta that create channel habitat and increase channel margins. But I think when you look at the potential for, you know, creating deep water habitat like you have at Frank's Tract, what have you done there? Is that good? And I think effectively, ecologically, you don't know what's going to come back. You can't call that restoration, I don't believe. I think you would call that creation. And then hydrodynamically, I think it's important to think about what that does to the tidal prism, the amount of water mixing in the estuary, coming in and going out. And yeah, I just wanted to basically say that the point I'm trying to make was similar, I believe, to what Mr. Kane was trying to make yesterday, that flow has a correlation to habitat and habitat availability, and the more water you have coming down, if you do so at the right times of year. I also believe that the device concept is a pretty good concept, I think, and yeah, if you have, it's not just about letting water down the river, it's about when you let that water down the river. And so I just wanted to wrap up my question. I was just wondering if any of you could explain to me what the difference, I heard adaptive management mentioned a lot, and I was wondering if you could explain to me, being a layman, what the difference between the current regulatory framework and the feedback loops there are, and what adaptive management would be, and how that would, I mean, if it's such a great thing, I don't really understand how it works exactly. And I mean, I saw the picture, but I'm just curious, what are the mechanisms that we have to make that work?
Thank you. And I don't think you expected an answer from us right this very second, but definitely we will be dealing with what does adaptive management mean, and before we put it into any document or have it as a requirement, it will be much clearer to all of us and to you. So thank you. I was told by Tam that Tim O'Laughlin always gets the last word.
Good afternoon. Tim O'Laughlin for the San Joaquin Tributaries Authority. Actually, I just have two questions for the board and for the staff. The first question is, we sent a request to you back in June or July, and we inquired as to whether or not the workshops that were being conducted in this process, which is phase 2, would be incorporated in phase 1. Because phase 1 is ongoing right now, and we haven't heard a response from you or your staff as to whether or not what's being compiled in these workshops is going to go into the phase 1 workshop. So that's question number one. They don't have to answer it right now. Okay. These are just follow-ups. And then the second question that we had is it's unclear, and we also sent you a note on this one, I think back in April or May. And it's unclear to us, your current process had a geographic boundary in regards to phase 1. Phase 2, it's unclear as to whether or not you will be looking at the San Joaquin River system above Vernalis to participate in OMR flows, water surface elevations in the delta, X2, delta outflow, or the like. So because the way your current document and notice is set up, it seems to imply to us, but it doesn't state it specifically, that the phase 1 workshop is kind of like the San Joaquin portion of everything, and we're done. If that's not true, just let us know. So we'd love to come and participate, and because it's been, you just need one more person in the room telling you what you should be doing, and we'd love to come and tell you that. But as far as we can, we'd love to stay out of the low salinity zone if possible, and not participate. So if somebody could get back to us on the 2 requests that we previously made, so we just have clarification on that moving forward, it would be helpful to us. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Diane, do you want to give a
I
quick
can take a crack at it.
preview? We
Yes.
will certainly follow up as well, but go ahead and
To the extent the phase 2 material is related to phase 1, we can incorporate that information. Of course, we're fairly far along in the phase 1 process. If you have more information, we'd like to see that as soon as possible. We'll also be having workshops on phase 1 in the near future, and we expect to receive more comments and more information during that phase. Relative to whether we're going to be looking anew at the phase 1 issues during phase 2, the hope is that we can address all of the phase 1 issues in that process, and that we'll be addressing the delta component of the San Joaquin River flows in phase 1. So the hope is not to, I don't want to speak for the board, but my preview answer is that I think we're not intending to take multiple bites at the apple, as Tim has expressed concern over in the past, that the intent is to address the San Joaquin issues all at once rather than coming back several times to look at these issues. But of course, there will still be the implementation phases in which we'll have to.
So let me follow up on that. So there's 2 things. One, the first answer, sorry, is non-responsive. I just, either I'm going to move it all into the record or try to push it all into the record, or you do it. And it's just easier if you just say, I'm going to take the CDs and enter it into the record. Whether or not you rely upon it or I rely upon it is something else, because the way it sounds now is if you rely upon it, then it's going to go in the record. Well, that's not really the way the administrative record gets built, because I get a chance to put in my part of the administrative record as well. The second part concerns me, because as I sit here today and yesterday, and listen to the discussion. Currently, the way phase 1 is set up is for flows from February through June. So right now, there's, let's call it this X2 factor in the fall, delta outflow in the fall. Well, that's not in your phase 1 notice. Okay, fall attraction flows aren't in your phase 1 notice. Okay, flows in the summertime, like there was mention of dissolved oxygen at the Deepwater Ship Channel, not in your phase 1 notice. Water surface elevations are not in your phase. OMR flows are not in your notice. So my question is, I'd be happy if it's all wrapped up in phase 1. I'm a little bit leery that you've noticed it properly and that that's what's going to happen. So if you would just let me know, I would appreciate it.
Thank you. Steve or Felicia, do you have any closing comments?
No conclusions, but I just want to thank people for hanging in there for these 2 days. I know we'll see a lot of you at the upcoming workshops. I know you can feel that they're long days, but again, I do appreciate the staff both responding to requests and setting up a process where we will all spend enough time with each other to flesh out, flag a host of issues, positions, and the rest. And again, just to encourage you to I know it's difficult to do, and it's not. But I don't think it's unrealistic to ask people to put themselves in our chairs. I'm not saying that'll solve it and we'll get the magic answer that way, but I actually think the most effective advocates do that.
And thank you, Brock, for coordinating and organizing this group. He described himself as a special party planner yesterday. So I think that's I think you've earned many titles. And thank you for the invited panel for sticking around when you really didn't absolutely have to, all of you, and I really appreciate that. And all of you for, as Felicia said, sticking it out. And I mean, look how many people are still here after 2 days. This is great. Now, remember, we're going to be meeting again for another 2 or 3 days on fish. That's October 1st, 2nd, and possibly the 3rd if we need to. So we cannot stop having fun up here. So we look forward to seeing all of you and working on some of the things that have come out here and getting back to Mr. O'Loughlin very quickly. Thank you.